March 9, 1962. A steamship leaves Holland carrying a Dutch family with a few suitcases, 75 guilders, and one piece of cargo they refuse to leave behind. A piano. Not because it's valuable, because it's proof. Proof they're musicians. Proof they have something to offer. Proof that when they arrive in a country where they don't speak the language, don't know the culture, and don't have a plan, they'll have one skill no one can take away. By the time they reach California, that 75 guilders amounts to roughly $50. And that piano. The father is a musician chasing the American dream. The mother is hoping it's real. And the two boys, Eddie and Alex, are about to spend 9 days on that ship playing piano for passengers like a traveling circus act. A kid freak show, Eddie will call it years later. Entertainment to justify the passage. Music as currency before it's ever a career. In 9 days, they'll dock in New York. Then it's a multi-day train ride across the country to California. And when they finally arrive in Pasadena, the American dream won't be waiting for them. It'll be hiding. Behind language barriers. Behind segregation. Behind a one-room apartment shared with 2 other families and a mother who cleans houses while the father washes dishes, because the big band gigs he was promised don't exist. This is the story of how Eddie Van Halen went from that one-room immigrant nightmare to the most explosive guitar player in rock history. How he turned bullying into obsession. How he traded drums for a guitar he didn't want and built a technique nobody had seen before. And how 7 years of relentless grinding and Pasadena backyard parties led to one rainy night at the Starwood, when the president of Warner Brothers walked in and everything changed. It starts on the ship, March 1962, 9 days at sea. Eddie and Alex Van Halen are kids. They've been training on piano for years, classical, rigid, the kind of training that builds muscle memory even if you never learn to read music the right way. And their parents know that piano is their leverage. It's the one thing that makes them different. The one thing that proves they're not just refugees looking for work. They're artists. So on the boat, the boys play. For passengers, for crew, for anyone who'll listen. It's not a concert, it's survival. A way to earn their passage. A way to make the family visible. And it works. People stop. People listen. People remember the Dutch kids with the fast fingers. But here's what that moment teaches Eddie before he ever touches American soil. Music isn't romantic, it's functional. It's not about self-expression or art or dreams. It's about proving you're worth keeping around. And that lesson doesn't leave him. Ever. 9 days later, they dock in New York. Then the train west. California. Pasadena. The land of sunshine and opportunity. And all the myths immigrants are sold before they realize the myths are for people who already have money. When the Van Halen family arrives in Pasadena, this is what's waiting for them. One room, shared with 2 other families. No English, no connections, no safety net. Jan Van Halen, the father, thought he'd be playing in big bands. He thought America wanted his talent. But America doesn't care. He takes work as a janitor, as a dishwasher. His hands swell from soap and cold water instead of trumpet valves. And Eugenia, the mother, cleans houses. She scrubs floors for families who have everything the Van Halens don't. The smell of bleach stays on her hands long after the work is done. And the boys? They go to school, where everything gets worse. Eddie describes his first day of school in America as absolutely frightening. The school is segregated. The white kids see him as foreign, weird, different. They don't just ignore him. They attack. They rip up his homework. They mock his accent. They make it clear he doesn't belong. And here's the detail that matters more than people realize. The first friends Eddie makes in America aren't the white kids. They're the black kids. The ones who know what it's like to be targeted. The ones who stand up for him when no one else does. The ones who teach him that survival in America isn't about fitting in. It's about finding your people and holding the line. That moment hardwires something in Eddie. If you can't win socially, You win by being undeniable. If they won't accept you, you make them respect you. And the only way to do that is skill. Pure, unignorable skill. So Eddie practices piano every day. Not because he loves it at first, because his parents demand it, because it's the family trade, because it's what keeps them connected to the only identity they have left. But Eddie doesn't just practice piano. He's watching. He's learning. He's absorbing the logic of the keyboard, the way both hands move independently, the way you can play melody and rhythm at the same time, the way the notes face up, right in front of you, like a blueprint. When Eddie picked up a guitar years later, he wasn't switching instruments. He was translating systems. And that logic, that pianist's brain, is what will turn him into the most innovative guitar player of his generation. Because when Eddie finally makes the switch, he doesn't think like a guitar player. He thinks like a pianist. And that difference is everything. But the switch doesn't happen because Eddie chooses it. It happens because of Alex. Eddie is on drums. Alex wants them. And one day, Eddie just gets tired of fighting about it. So he says the line that changes rock history. Go ahead, take my drums. I'll play your damn guitar. It's not destiny. It's not passion. It's brother economics, household pressure, stubborn pride. Eddie picks up the guitar because he's tired of arguing. And then he realizes something. The guitar can do things the drums can't. It can be loud. It can be fast. It can be technical. It can be proof. So he starts practicing, not casually, obsessively, hours a day, taking apart the instrument, rebuilding it, modifying it, because he can't afford the gear the other kids have. So he invents solutions. He strips paint. He rewires pickups. He builds his own sound because no one's going to hand it to him. And while he's doing that, he's dragging Alex with him. They form bands. They play backyard parties. They knock on doors. They record demos on borrowed equipment. They photocopy flyers and hand them out at school. They do everything themselves because no one's going to do it for them. Nearly a decade of being told no. Most bands quit by year 2. They didn't quit by year 7. They kept playing parties in Pasadena. Kept getting rejected. Kept being told they're too loud, too weird, too aggressive, too much. Kept watching other bands get signed while they kept grinding. But here's what those 7 years build. A sound. A reputation. A live show so explosive that people start talking. The backyard circuit turns into the club circuit. The club circuit turns into residencies. And the residencies turn into something bigger. Because by the mid-1970s, Van Halen isn't just a band. They're the band. The most feared live act in Southern California. The band other bands don't want to follow. The band that can empty a room or fill it, depending on the night. The band everyone's heard of, but no one's signed. And then comes the night that changes everything. February 1977. The Starwood. Van Halen is playing. It's raining. The crowd is thin. Just another gig that hasn't led anywhere. But in the back of the room, 2 men are watching. Ted Templeman, producer, and Mo Austin, president of Warner Brothers Records. Templeman is there because a guy named Marshall Burl called him. Burley is connected to the Whiskey A Go-Go scene. He's been watching Van Halen for months, and he tells Templeman he has to see this band. Templeman usually ignores those calls. Everyone thinks their band is special, but something about Burl's tone makes him show up. So Templeman watches the first night, and he's stunned. The sound, the speed, the precision. And Eddie is doing things on guitar that Templeman has never seen before. Not just fast, not just technical, different, like he's playing a different instrument. Templeman comes back the next night, and this time he brings Mo Austin, the man who can greenlight a deal without asking anyone. And they watch, and when the set ends, they don't leave. They don't schedule a meeting. They walk backstage and offer the deal. Right there. That night. Eddie will later describe that moment as surreal. An empty house on a rainy night. And suddenly, the two most important men in the industry are standing there saying yes. But here's the thing. That yes didn't come from luck. It came from years of preparation. Years of backyard parties and rejection and relentless repetition. Years of building a live show so tight, so explosive, so undeniable that when the right people finally showed up, there was no debate. The deal gets signed. The album gets recorded. And in 1978, Van Halen's self-titled debut is released. It doesn't just sell, it detonates. Running with the Devil. Ain't Talking About Love. Eruption. A 90-second guitar solo that redefines what's possible on the instrument. Critics call it the most important rock debut since Led Zeppelin. Guitar players call it a nightmare, because Eddie just raised the bar so high that everyone else has to start over. The tapping technique, the harmonics, the speed, the tone. It's not an evolution, it's a revolution. And Eddie traces it all back to necessity, to immigration, to not being able to afford the gear everyone else had, to being forced to invent solutions, to thinking like a pianist while playing a guitar, to 7 years of grinding in Pasadena backyards while everyone else was waiting for someone to discover them. Years later, at the Smithsonian, Eddie sums it up in one sentence. We came here with approximately $50 and a piano. If that's not the American dream, what is? But the real story isn't the dream, it's the fight. The immigrant reality that doesn't show up in the brochures. The one-room apartment, the segregated school, the bullying, the parents working jobs they're overqualified for just to survive. The 7 years of rejection before the yes. Because Eddie Van Halen didn't arrive in America and get discovered. He arrived in America and got ignored. And then he spent 7 years making himself impossible to ignore. The piano on the ship wasn't romantic, it was proof. Proof that the family had value. Proof that they could contribute. Proof that they were worth letting in. And when that proof didn't translate to success, Eddie built new proof. On a guitar he didn't want. With a technique no one taught him. Through 7 years of relentless grinding that most people would have quit after 7 months. And when Ted Templeman and Mo Ostin walked into the Starwood on that rainy night in 1977, they weren't discovering an unknown band. They were witnessing the end result of years of work that refused to stop. Because that's the real lesson of Eddie Van Halen's story. The American dream doesn't greet you at the dock. It doesn't wait for you in cramped quarters where thin walls carry every sound from the families next door. It doesn't show up at your backyard party. It doesn't care that you brought a piano. The American dream makes you fight for it, every single day, for years, until the people who matter finally show up and realize they're not discovering you, they're catching up. Eddie Van Halen arrived in America in 1962 with 75 guilders and a piano. By 1978, he'd redefined rock guitar. But the space between those two moments isn't magic. It's not destiny. It's not luck. It's a 9-day boat ride where music is survival. It's a one-room apartment with 2 other families. It's a school where the white kids rip up your homework and the black kids teach you how to stand. It's a father washing dishes and a mother cleaning houses. It's a guitar you didn't want and a technique you had to invent. It's 7 years of backyard parties and rejection and photocopied flyers. And then it's one rainy night at the Starwood, when the president of Warner Brothers walks in, and the kid from the boat finally stops being foreign, finally stops being different, finally stops being the outsider, because he's undeniable. And he didn't get there by fitting in, and he got there by refusing to stop until they had no choice but to say yes. March 9th, 1962. A Dutch family boards a ship with a piano. June 1st, 1969. John Lennon records a protest song in a hotel room. August 23rd, 1977. Waylon Jennings flushes cocaine while the DEA searches his studio. And February 1977. Eddie Van Halen plays a rainy night set at the Starwood that changes rock history. 4 different stories, 4 different outcomes, but the same lesson. The thing you're famous for isn't the thing that made you. It's the thing you built while no one was watching, while you were grinding, while you were struggling, while you were fighting to prove you belonged. Eddie Van Halen didn't come to America to be a guitar hero. He came to America because his father believed in a dream. And when that dream didn't show up, Eddie built his own. One backyard party at a time. One modified guitar at a time. One 7-year grind at a time. And on a rainy night in 1977, the dream finally caught up. Not because it was waiting, but because Eddie refused to stop chasing it. The piano got them into America. The guitar made sure Eddie never had to ask permission again. But here's what makes Eddie's story different from every other immigrant makes good narrative. It wasn't just about escaping poverty. It wasn't just about achieving success. It was about fundamentally rewriting the rules of an instrument that already had 50 years of established technique. Most guitarists who arrived in the 1970s were copying their heroes, learning the same solos, playing the same scales, following the same roadmap that Led Zeppelin and Cream and Hendrix had laid out. Eddie didn't have that luxury. He couldn't afford the gear to sound like anyone else. He couldn't afford the lessons to play like anyone else. So he invented his own language, not as an artistic choice, as a survival mechanism. The tapping technique that made Eruption legendary wasn't a creative breakthrough. It was problem-solving. Eddie wanted to play faster than his fingers could move in a straight line, so he used both hands on the fretboard, like a pianist, because that's what his brain understood. That's what years of classical training had wired into his nervous system before he ever touched a guitar. And that's the hidden lesson in the Van Halen story. The thing that made Eddie revolutionary wasn't natural talent. It was forced innovation. It was being an outsider for so long that by the time he got inside, he'd already built a completely different playbook. The white kids who ripped up his homework taught him that acceptance wasn't the goal. Dominance was. The black kids who defended him taught him that loyalty matters more than proximity. The one-room apartment taught him that privacy is a luxury and focus is a weapon. The years of rejection taught him that persistence isn't romantic. It's just math. If you knock on enough doors for long enough, eventually someone opens one. And when Warner Brothers opened that door at the Starwood, they weren't just signing a band. They were signing the consequences of a decade of preparation that nobody witnessed. The 10,000 hours that happened in Pasadena backyards, while the rest of the music industry was focused on the Sunset Strip. The modifications and innovations and techniques that Eddie built in isolation because he had no other choice. That's why Van Halen's debut album doesn't sound like anything that came before it, because it wasn't influenced by anything that came before it. It was built in a vacuum, by a Dutch immigrant who learned English from bullies and learned guitar from necessity, and learned showmanship from playing to crowds who didn't care if he succeeded. The album goes platinum, then double platinum, then triple. Eruption becomes the most replayed guitar solo in rock history. Guitar magazines start running tutorials on Eddie's technique. Guitar teachers start teaching tapping as a standard skill. Guitar manufacturers start building instruments to Eddie's specifications. The entire industry shifts to accommodate one player's approach. But Eddie never forgets where it came from. He never pretends it was destiny. He never rewrites the story to make it cleaner. In every interview, he goes back to the same details. The boat, the piano, the 75 guilders, the one room, the kids who ripped up his homework, the years of hearing no. Because those details aren't backstory. They're the story. The success isn't separate from the struggle. The success is what happens when the struggle refuses to end until it transforms into something the world can't ignore. And that transformation doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen because someone discovers you. It doesn't happen because you're in the right place at the right time. It happens because you spend a decade building something so undeniable that when the right people finally show up, the only rational response is yes. Eddie Van Halen didn't get lucky at the Starwood. He got inevitable. And inevitability isn't a moment. It's a decade of moments. It's 9 days on a boat playing piano for passengers. It's a first day of school where nobody speaks your language. It's a father's hands swelling from dishwater. It's a mother coming home smelling like bleach. It's a brother stealing your drums. It's a guitar you didn't want becoming the only thing that matters. It's 7 years of backyard parties where nobody important is watching. It's showing up anyway. That's what the Warner Brothers executives saw when they walked into the Starwood that rainy night. They didn't see potential. They saw proof. Proof that the kid from the boat with the piano had turned himself into something the music industry had never seen before. And 50 years later, when people talk about the greatest guitarist of all time, Eddie's name is always in the conversation. Not because he was born with a gift, but because he was born into circumstances that forced him to build his own gifts from scratch. March 9th, 1962. A Dutch family boards a ship with 75 guilders and a piano. February 1977. That family's youngest son walks into the Starwood with a guitar he built himself and a technique nobody's seen before. And the president of Warner Brothers says yes before the set even ends. 15 years between those two moments. 15 years of translation, of transformation, of refusing to accept that being foreign meant being less, of turning disadvantage into innovation, of making sure that by the time anyone important was paying attention, there was nothing left to debate. The piano got them into America. The guitar made sure Eddie never had to ask permission again. And the years in between, those are what made the guitar matter